Hello, so today we're going to start solving polynomials. So there's three different forms that we're going to see these polynomials in. The first one is quadratic form. So pretty much like right here, it has an x to the fourth and an x squared and your constant. So if you guys remember, you could factor like x squared plus x minus 12. And you would be looking for two numbers that multiply to 12 and subtract to 1. So that would be 4 and 3. And you would factor it. But if you notice, we have x squared and then x to the first. So it's half of that x squared. Right here, it's x to the fourth and x squared. That squared is half of that 4. So you would split it up x squared and do the same exact thing as our regular factoring. You could have x to the eighth plus x to the fourth, like minus 12. Then it would just be x to the fourth plus 4, and x to the fourth minus 3. So the number that you put here and here, it's always going to be that middle number. So we're going to see examples of this. And then if you can factor it further, you need to. For example, we have x to the fourth minus 13x squared plus 42. So we already know x squared is going to go in both of these because that's the number that's here. We want two numbers that multiply to 42 and add to 13. That would be 7 and 6. And then following our same sign rules, if the last sign is positive, it means they're both the same, and they're both whatever that first number is. Since 6 and 7 are not perfect squares, we don't have a difference of two squares, so we cannot factor this any further. For this next one, again, we know it's going to be x squared and x squared. We want two numbers that multiply to 24 and add to 10. That would be 6 and 4. This means they're the same. We look back, they're both negative. Well, now right here, this is the difference of two squares. So we can factor x squared minus 4 into x plus 2 and x minus 2, and then bring down your x squared minus 6, and now that one's fully factored. So just make sure you're always checking to see if you can factor it further. The other thing we're going to look at is sum and difference of cubes. So if we have a cubed plus b cubed, so they can be like numbers too, it's just always going to be in these forms. Your a, your b, a squared, then multiplied together, and then b squared. And your signs follow the acronym SOAP. Same, opposite, always positive. So this first one is the same as the sign up there. The second one is the opposite of the sign up there. And the last one is always positive. So if it's negative, it's same, opposite, always positive. Some examples of these. So we have x cubed plus 27. With 27, like with numbers, I like to write out what the cube is. So we have x cubed plus 3 cubed. So first, I like to go through and set up my signs. So we have same, opposite, always positive. You always take the first of each, so we just get x plus 3. Then square the first one, x squared, and then 3 squared goes last. And then in the middle, they're just multiplied together, so 3x. So we get x plus 3 times x squared minus 3x plus 9. You cannot factor this further because nothing multiplies to 9 and adds to 3. For this one, 8 is 2 cubed, and then x cubed minus 5 cubed. And again, I like to set up my signs. So we have same, opposite, always positive. So you just have what the cubes are, so 2x minus 5. Then the first set is squared, so 2 squared is 4, and then x squared. In the last section, that 5 is squared, so 25. And then in the middle, they're all multiplied together. So 2x times 5 gives us 10x. So this would be your factoring. The last thing we're going to look at is factoring by grouping. So to do this, you're going to group off your first two terms and then group off your second two terms. and factor out a GCF from each. So like in x to the 6th minus 3x to the 4th, x to the 4th goes in both of them, so I'm going to take that out. And we're left with x squared minus 3. Then in the second one, negative 4 goes into both of them. So I'm going to take that out. We're left with x squared minus 3. Some of you might think to just take out a positive 4, but you also want to make these parentheses match. So I knew it had to be negative 4 to flip that sign. Once they match these two parentheses, your first set of parentheses is what you pulled out. So x to the 4th minus 4. And your second set of parentheses is the matching set, just written once, so x squared minus 3. Then see if you can factor it any further. This is the difference of two squares. So we have x squared minus 2, x squared plus 2, and x squared minus 3. That now cannot be factored any further. Sometimes you're going to have to flip around the order of them. We'll go over that more in class. But I'm going to start off the same way here. This first set, I'm going to take out x to the 4th again. We're left with x squared plus 4. And in the second set, I'm going to take out a negative 1 to make it match that first set. So x squared plus 4. Then we're left with x to the 4th minus 1, because it's what you pulled out. And then x squared plus 4. Well, x to the 4th minus 1 is the difference of two squares. So we have x squared minus 1, x squared plus 1. Then x squared plus 4. Well, now again, x squared minus 1 is the difference of two squares. So we have x minus 1, x plus 1, x squared plus 1, and x squared plus 4. So sometimes you have to keep on factoring for a really long time. So the last thing we're going to look at is actually solving these. So your first step is to factor them no matter what form they're in, and then set all your parentheses equal to 0. So I'm going to just come back to this one as an example. So we would have to do x minus 1 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0, x squared plus 1 equals 0, x squared plus 4 equals 0, and solve them. So clearly this first one we add 1, so we get x equals 1. Subtract 1, x is negative 1. This one we have x squared equals negative 1, and you take the square root of both sides. This is what we learned, the square root of negative 1 is I. So we're going to get x equals plus or minus I. Every single time you guys take a square root, make sure you put plus or minus, because positive I is a solution and negative I is a solution. Now we have x squared equals negative 4. So x is plus or minus 2i. So the number of solutions you get, so each one of these plus or minuses is 2 answers, because we have positive 2i and negative 2i, positive I, negative I. So total here we have 6 answers. It should be the same as your highest degree. So sometimes you're going to get like plus or minus a square root of 3 or something. You could get imaginary answers. Just make sure you solve all of them. And we're going to go over this more in class, so come to class with any questions.